with their words. And for me, I also added, this isn't from the scripture, but this pattern I've seen with them of this continual questioning. That's what I feel like is wearying him, because they keep asking him why and how and things like that. So let me bring this screen up in case anybody here or at home, somebody's on, got some background noise. Could you mute or something? Okay, so for anybody who's still not sure, again, how this looks, you heard all the ladies' answers. They're up here in one way, shape, or form, right? Mine probably contain more than what most people put, but everybody's kind of got bits and pieces of this. And it isn't a, this is the correct answer. This is a how it might look kind of answer. And definitely verse 17 has my own spin on it, because that's been the thing that has stuck with me as I read the people's response to God. So this can also be a place, and we have another place for this on what the bottom of this form would be a place for insight and application. But you can also use this as your, this is where I'm going to engage with God. When I think of it, I want to put it down. Okay, any other questions or thoughts on just up through here before we jump into the cross references? Okay, so overall, would you say, even without going further, did you understand what chapter 2 of Malachi is about? Did you all think you all sounded like you understood it, even if you don't want to speak for yourself? I thought so. I thought you all sounded like you got what the main point is that God is talking about, which again is one of those times we want to remind ourselves that we can do that. We want to say that we can do that. Could everybody do mute for a minute so I know if this is me or somebody else?
I think Janelle needs to mute.
Oh, there's nothing going on.
I just muted her.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure who it either was Pat or Janelle. Maybe it was Pat, because she's not on screen right now, so maybe she's taking a call or something. Okay, sorry. Okay, so this completes your observation. Usually this is where you'll have done it officially. It doesn't mean you won't find other things later. That happens for me all the time, especially things like those contrasts or conclusions. I might not notice those till I'm looking back through things, or I might not notice a repeated word, and all of a sudden when I'm looking at topics, they'll hit me of, you know what, I think I want to do more with this. And that's why we'll save the chapter theme until we finish the whole thing, so we can even double check, would I keep the same segment themes that I have? These seem pretty straightforward, and we probably would, but that way you know for sure how you have gotten your understanding. Okay, so we talked about, as we went through this last week pretty well, we started to talk about, we went through the segments pretty slowly, kind of line by line and verse by verse, to look at God, and we looked at the priest, and we looked at the people. And then by doing that, we started to lay out some topics that were either keywords or we wanted to look something up for information. So either in your notes, or if you just are glancing at verses 1 through 9, what were some of those things that we talked about if you were with us before, or that you're seeing now that are places you either did go to, because I know you might have started this for your homework, started to look these things up. What are some of the topics? This is what we would be the what that you might need more information on. So you can all unmute at this point, but we'll see.
The covenant with Levi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a specific covenant with Levi. Good. Anybody else from 1 through 9?
I thought it was interesting about the curse is your blessing.
Good. I'm I'm glad Fran asked that question because I have us looking at that. I have some of the cross references for there because again, even if we think we're familiar with why they're being cursed or what the curse means, it's always good to go at least do a brief check on a big topic like this. I mean, is this important? You know, the fact that God's cursing his people, right? Remember we said that sometimes if you're reading along and your brain just goes, okay, God, in chapter 1, you said you love these people, and now you say you're cursing them. Why are you cursing your people? Whenever you feel that way or think that or have that question, that's definitely a place you want to look and see. And so even if we feel like we have a pretty good idea, it wouldn't hurt to look at a few places to see what it's about. So I think those are good starting points. This curse to the people that we see in verses 2 and 3. And then in verses 4 and 5, he's talking about this covenant with Levi, using it as an example. And then he goes on to focus on, who's he focused on in verses 6 to 9?
The priest.
The priest. And we kind of talked about last week that as we looked deep at those 4 verses, there seemed to be a word that popped up repeatedly. In fact, I think it's in each verse one time. Anybody have that circled or remember what that is?
Instruction.
Instruction. So we can see that the instruction was a key component of what the priests were supposed to do. Verse 6 told us that Levi had it, and verses 7 through 9 talks about it with the priests. And so we might look at that, or at least you might want to look at verses 6 through 9, some cross references to see, well, verse 7 tells me what the priest should do. And if I look at cross references, I might get some more information on what God wanted the priest to do. So those will most likely be our focuses tonight. It might be as far as we get. We'll see how it goes and how much we've already started with. So let's see what I have. Did anybody already look at? We're going to start off doing these together so we can talk about again, how we do this. And so what I would do is pick a verse, right? So if it's verse 2, right? That if I'm looking at verse 2, I see God talking to them about the curse, right? And he said, actually, you know what? Would somebody read just verses 1 through 9 for us? Let's get this back in our minds and read it out loud.
I can.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
And now the commandment is for you, O priests. If you do not listen, and if you do not take it to heart to give honor to my name, says the Lord of hosts, then I will send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. And indeed, I have cursed them already, because behold, I am going to rebuke your offspring, and I will spread refuse on your faces, the refuse of your feasts, and I will be taken away with it. Then you will know that I have sent this commandment to you, that my covenant may continue with Levi of hosts. My covenant with him was the one of life and peace, and I gave them to him as an object of reverence. So he revered me and stood in awe of my name. Truth and unrighteousness was not found on his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many back from iniquity. For the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth. For he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. But as for you, you have turned aside from the way. You have caused many to stumble by the instruction, and you have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says the Lord of hosts. So I have also made you despiteful, just as you are not keeping my ways, but are showing partiality in the instruction.
Okay, so back to verse 2. We know God had said in verse 1, this is a commandment to you, O priest. And that's how we know he's talking directly to the priest. And then he starts talking about this curse. And again, this might be a place where at least some people, or at least some of us in some way, might be trying to remember why a curse, you know, and he says he's already done it. And he says it's because they haven't given honor to his name. And what we want to do is make sure we take care of any places where we could, or where people could question God or his motives, right? Like people might think, well, how did they know what they were supposed to do? How did they know how to honor their name? And so when we look at cross references, we can find out, well, is this a surprise to them or not? You know, what has God already said about this is one of the things we find. So it sounded like Fran at least had maybe thought about looking this up, or if anybody else has verses. And what I did this week is I had done some from Bible Hub, which gave me this bigger range of verses that for today, I just went back to my Bible and just went with the ones that were there. So that's what I have. And I know some of you may have different ones. And I, for tonight's purposes, did kind of read them down a little bit, but we may assign some things in rows, but let's for now see where you started. If any of you started at this place, would you share with us a verse that you would have that would help us?
Well, the one that was in the cross-reference in the inductive Bible was the one that I found was Deuteronomy 28:20.
Okay, what's that one tell you, Fran?
And it says, the Lord will send upon you curses, confusion, and rebuke in all that you undertake to do until you're destroyed, until you perish quickly, on account of the evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. And it's in reference to, I think it's talking, I think that before that is Moses has been, there's a lot of cursing going on all in the chapters leading up to it.
Yes.
And so I think isn't in regards to after Aaron, after the tribe of, or the Levite under priesthood under Aaron was formed, and it was kind of God's kind of like, this is what's going to happen. You have to stand by these, you have to keep these standards and my commandments, my statutes, or you're cursed.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah,
blessings, but you're cursed if you don't.
Yeah. So we'll look at, if you look, my Bible gave a couple additional verses to go with verse 20. And I'll come to you in just a second, Dee Dee. But yeah, by the time you get to this point in Deuteronomy, it's almost like God's reiterating and summarizing the things he's already told them all the way back in Exodus and in Leviticus and probably in Numbers. So this is sort of Moses's, I think it's like his last words, right? Him reminding the people, including the priests, what they were supposed to do. Dee Dee, do you want to add something at this moment?
Yeah, mine, I found a little clearer, Deuteronomy 11:26-28. See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you today. The curse, if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I command you today by following other gods which you have not known.
Okay, that's one of the good summary verses, but I also want to show you that Deuteronomy 28 itself, if you have the bigger context than just verse 20, it can show you the same thing. So if all of you have a Bible or a phone or whatever you're using tonight, would go ahead and open to Deuteronomy 28. I want to talk again about how to go through these longer passages, these longer cross references to get this all out of them. I basically, at least mentally, sort of still precept them, right? I ask myself the questions. What I'm really doing is looking for words and concepts that are in that cross reference that actually refer exactly to words in the passage I'm talking about. And we will see that here in Deuteronomy 28 and in what Dee Dee had as well from chapter 11. You would actually find this in many places in those first 5 books where God has given them these instructions. So if you've got that open, would somebody read Deuteronomy 28:15? Just that one verse.
But it shall come about if you do not obey the Lord your God to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes with which I charge you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you.
Okay, so if you've all got that in front of you, maybe I should bring it up. I got this one, it's got markings on it already, but I'm going to bring it up and we'll talk about what's the first word in that verse?
But
So in verse 15, he's talking about the curses. But if I really want the full context, I'd have to go look before. We're not going to do that right away, but that is something to be aware of. So mentally, I would at least do what I'm going to show you here on this passage. I would have, again, I'm going to notice the fact that I've got a contrast. And so to fully understand what's going to happen in verse 15 and down, I really will want to go back and look at what he said in the verses before. The other thing that I do, which doesn't really fall neatly into any of the observation categories we talk about, is this word if. And I usually do with it what you see here. I circle that in red because I know there's an if then coming, right? If you do this, usually what follows that is God's going to do this or this will happen. Those are things I want to know. So I usually mark it to catch my attention. Then I've got the word obey, which I always am going to look at. And why did I underline the word commandments?
That's what he's commanding,
Yeah.
to obey.
Yeah. And what else? Why did that strike me here? Again, I'm looking for things that relate back to the verse I started with in Malachi 2.
Because
Malachi.
it's in that verse.
Yeah, it's in the verse. He's
Yeah.
giving them a commandment and he's talking about the commandment, the covenant of Levi. And then here's this word curses, right? So now I know I'm in a verse that's going to relate. Sometimes when you look up a cross-reference, you look at it and you're not always sure you need it. It's not really looking. This one to me looks like I'm going to get what I'm looking for here. Okay, so that was just verse 15. And then in my Bible, it also took you not to just verse 20, but all of these. Did that still come up? This is where Fran said there's a lot of cursing going on. So this is a place where you could see, if you just keep reading Deuteronomy 28, and we're not going to read all of them, you would see everything he says about cursing them and what exactly that's going to be. What's interesting when you get these contexts, though, is you also see why, right? You will look for, it will say things like Fran already told us, because you have forsaken me. My version says abandoned me, right? These are things that you'll see them talking about. Now, on your own, if you all would look back, just take a minute or two, look at the verses we talked about. We said there's obviously something that comes before the curses because verse 15 started with the word but. So just take a few minutes and look at verses 1 to 14 and let us know what you find out.
Well, the word bless and blessing pops out.
Okay. So
if you diligently obey, the God will set you high above all the nations.
Okay, so if a person were to just start at verse 15, 14 and 15 and go on, it just looks like God's a God about the cursing. But when you add back verses 1 to 14, what does he start with?
Blessed be.
He
blessed-
starts with blessing. And if you were to cross-reference those references, you would get back to the very beginning where God says, if you obey me, there will be blessing. If you do not obey me, there will be cursing. So far, does it sound to you like God has given the people full warning about their obedience to him and what it will mean?
Mhm.
Yes. So should they be taken off guard by the time they get to Malachi, which is the last word of the Old Testament? No. Okay. Let's also go. I have Leviticus 26. So if you want to open up there, Leviticus 26, 14 and 15. This is another verse that actually kind of just gets to the heart a bit quicker. If somebody gets there, would you read both of those verses to us, 14 and 15?
Well, I had those as cross references.
Okay,
But if you do not obey me and do not carry out all these commandments, if instead you reject my statutes, and if your soul loathes my ordinances, so as not to carry out all my commandments, but rather to break my covenant.
okay. This is the same thing. If you were to look in the verses before, you'd find the opposite information. If you continue reading, you're going to find more about what the curses are. What I do notice right away when I hear this passage is I've got that same pattern. I've got, but if you obey or do not obey these commandments, and rather what happens, this one tells me when they break the commandments, they're breaking what else? Did you guys catch that word?
Covenant.
Covenant. So now I'm definitely right back to the topics God is talking about in Malachi, right? Because we've got that picture as well. This is one, if you have it open, this is actually the chapter where you can really see what God is going to do in terms of his kind of action words. If you look at 16 through 20, I in turn will do this to you, is what you see, right? You start to see this list of, I will summon a sudden terror, and you don't have to have the full details. Verse 17, what's the I will statement?
Set my face against you.
Okay. And that one, what does that gonna mean for them? What is that gonna mean?
So that you'll be struck down by your enemies.
Yep, you'll be defeated now instead of victorious. In verse 18, and this is a continued pattern, right? He says, if you don't obey, I'll do this. Then if you still don't obey, I'll do this. Then if you still don't obey, is that a God who's giving a lot of chances? Right? He just keeps going. It does get worse, but he doesn't just strike them dead, right? He doesn't just say, okay, I'm done with you. He just says you're going to have more and more consequences, right? Verse 18, I will punish you. Verse 19, what's he going to do?
Break down your pride.
Yep.
And
And in
power.
verse 20, we don't see the I will, but what's going to happen to them in general from verse 20?
They will not yield their fruit and their produce.
Okay, so then we see this promise that things won't happen well for their land. And again, if you look at the earlier verses, you'd find the exact opposite happening, right? The blessings will be the exact opposite. Those are beautiful verses, right? If you were to read in those first 14 verses of both of those chapters, or whichever, I think it's almost exactly the same amount, you will see all of the beauty that God promises to them. They're just amazing promises for good. And do you wonder, why didn't they focus on those? Why did they forget that that's what they could have had? Why is the temptation so strong to disobey? If you think about that question as you read again and we study Malachi 2 and look at more cross references, it's really going to resonate with you why God gave them some of the other warnings he gave them that are very specific to this chapter. Okay, my Bible also had Malachi 3:9, which sometimes when you get a verse right from the chapter you're in, that's kind of a quick one. You can just kind of go look and see what it adds because we know we're going to have the same context. Anybody have Malachi 3:9 pretty handy?
Yes, you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation, of you.
Okay, so we know by the time we get to chapter 3, God's definitely talking to all of them. Does this topic, when you see you are robbing me, the entire nation of you, is that something we've already seen him talk about with them?
Yeah.
Yeah, where was that?
Chapter 1.
Yeah, chapter 1. Do you have the verse, Deanna?
Yeah, it was towards the end.
114.
In 114, he called them swindlers. In 13, you bring what was taken by robbery
Yep.
with the offerings.
Yeah, so you want to think about that context. He said, you made a vow to give me one kind of offering, and then you gave me something instead. And God calls that robbery. If you stop and think about it, would we call that robbery as well if somebody did that to us?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got a quick example I thought of today. Let's say you're going to order something from Etsy and it's a handcrafted item. And it's a picture and it says it's made from these amazing materials and you're going to pay this price and you're going to get this handcrafted item made out of wood and gold and solid materials. Then the person who makes it, instead of making it with those materials, makes it with other materials, still charges you the same price and then sends it to you. Did they rob you? Yeah, they promised you one thing and they gave you something else, something inferior to what they promised you. And that's what they do to God. And is it what we do to God? If we say, I'm going to do this for you, and then we say, yeah, I'm not actually going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way. And we can see what God would call that. And so that's, again, back to some of the application we talked about last week. But whenever we're not sure of those, I always try to think of an image or a picture that I would have from sort of a real life situation to talk about that. Okay. This is also from Deuteronomy 28. My Bible didn't send me here, but either because I read the rest of the chapter or because I looked at other verses, if you get very near the end, so I think it's Deuteronomy 28, starting at verse 45. If somebody would read 45 to 48 for us, I think that this was kind of a good summary as well. If you're looking for verses that kind of grab you, we've had a couple of them that just kind of give you a succinct picture of what's going on here. This one might be another place.
45.
Yeah.
So all these curses shall come on you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you would not obey the Lord your God by keeping his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. They shall become a sign and a wonder on you and your descendants forever. Keep going.
Yeah, to 48.
Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and a glad heart for the abundance of all things. Therefore you shall serve your enemies whom the Lord will send against you in hunger, in thirst, in nakedness, and in the lack of all things. And he will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you.
Okay.
Wow.
So again, the gravity with which God warned them, and also you see again words that you didn't serve me cheerfully. You weren't grateful. You didn't understand this relationship, as we've kind of looked and talked about. So I thought that was another one that really brought it home what he's talking about. And we know here he's talking to the priests, and most of those were just sort of on general curse. But this is what's awesome about continuing on in cross references that you think are specifically for one set of verses, then you realize they actually apply to the whole chapter as well. So I'm going to check and make sure you don't have any questions or any other verses or places, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Anybody have anything they need to bring up about those first 3 verses and the cross references? And again, for you at home on your own, how do you know when you're done? You know you're done with a segment when you go, I get it. So you may not have needed all the verses we looked at, but sometimes when you see it, you kind of want to keep going and go, okay, well, let me see what else it says here, because I'm getting this really big picture of what God's talking about. But when you hit a moment where you go, okay, got it, then, you're done for you. That's what you're looking for, is you're looking for that verification of what the chapter's talking about. Nobody? Okay, so we're going to move on to looking at verses 4 through 6. And I am going to not break you guys into groups, but assign you some scripture in rows, and I'll tell you who you are, just so that we have a way to take turns talking and sort of divide these up, because I think I'll end up talking less if you're all looking some things up. So Deanna, Dee Dee, and Lisa, would you look up Numbers 3, 11 to 13, and verse 45? And Numbers 18, verse 21. Now, again, if you all have other cross references, we'll add those and talk about those as well. We're just going to start here. Okay, so Evelyn, Sarah, Cheryl, and Fran, would you look up Nehemiah 13, 29, which sounds very short compared to what the other ladies had, but it is a verse where you're going to need to look at more context. Okay, Nehemiah 13, 29, and then find the context that you need. And that will leave the rest of you, which is Tracy, Janelle, Pat, Laura, and Stephanie, to look at Numbers 25. The specific verses were 7, 8, 12, and 13, but you might need to look a bit more. So let me give you each, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes till it looks like you're done. And then we'll start our discussion then. And so remember, what we're looking for is information on this covenant with Levi. Like, if I don't know who Levi is, or if I want to see, hey, I know about covenant, but what's this specific covenant with Levi? That's what we should be finding some help with. Okay. Oh. Let me hop off screen for a minute so I don't try to talk to you. Okay. Pretty good to get started at least. Okay, so let's have Deanna, Dee Dee, and Lisa talk to us about the Numbers 3 passage and Numbers 18.
Numbers 3, starting with 11, says that the Lord is going to take the Levites instead of the firstborn
Okay,
from the womb, from among the sons of Israel,
okay,
because all firstborns belong to God.
okay.
And then
Deanna, do you want to add the other part or anything different, or is it the same? What do you think?
Well, it's pretty much the same.
Okay. Does Numbers
I have,
18:21 add anything, or go ahead, Dee Dee?
well, I have a question on 45, because I didn't, and the cattle of the Levites, or do we want to go down that rabbit hole?
Let's see. Yeah, I didn't really look at it in detail.
Okay,
But it looks like what it says. So their cattle looks like is going to be their cattle instead of the firstborn cattle. That's all I can get from that without looking it up. But
okay,
that would make sense, I think, based on also the care for them, right? Which we learn about also in Numbers 18:21. So Deanna or Lisa, do you want to add to us what we learn in 18:21?
God gave the Levites all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance in return for the work they do, the service of the tent of meeting.
Okay, so he was providing for them, and so that original tithe was meant to be for them. Literally, they were paying their priests for the work that priests do. Does that sound like a concept we understand? Do our tithes matter at church? Yeah, they do. They still are supposed to do what they were originally supposed to do, which is provide payment for the spiritual leadership that we're getting through these servants of the Lord. Okay, anything else from the Numbers passages, or did anybody have we'll save all of the extras for the end. Let's do it that way. Okay. Nehemiah 13:21, the group that had that. I have to switch slides if I go looking, which sounds simple, but you really need, would somebody from your group just read us what 13:29 says so we see why we have to go get more context?
Remember them, oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites.
Okay, so what I get from there so far is that it does appear to relate to my topic, but does it really give me the why or any of that information if I don't go look a bit further? Remembering them, I know they've defiled the priesthood. Do I know why they defiled the priesthood? No. So if you looked at the bigger context in Nehemiah 13, what did you guys learn?
From which verses?
Nehemiah 13:29 was the starting verse, but I said we needed more context.
Well, I started way back at the beginning.
Okay.
13:1, and it's talking about Nehemiah bringing the book back out and reading to the people. And once they understood what it actually said, they started separating themselves from the
Okay.
Moabites and Ammonites. And then really all the way through it, it was just different things that he was correcting, just like he did there in Malachi in chapter 2.
Okay, so you hit on it, but didn't really tell us what is it specifically that verse 29 is saying that the priests did to defile the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood.
Well, they broke covenant. They weren't doing what God has
How?
commanded.
There's a
By,
spec-
they were letting anyone into the assembly.
okay,
They were not,
anybody want to help Evelyn out?
obeying,
It
basically.
was that in
The
a
men of
way,
Judah married, I would say the men of Judah married women from Ashad and Ammon and a Moab.
Okay, so and Evelyn had sort of had it in there, but didn't really tell us this is the why. Why do I want to make sure we catch that from this cross-reference passage?
Because it's
Because
referred to.
Whoops, either Dee Dee or Fran, one of you go
Go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead, Dee Dee. Well,
because marrying foreign women comes up later in the chapter.
Okay, exactly. This, when I read the bigger context, I went, great. I'm so happy I read the bigger context because now I have more information for the rest of this Malachi chapter 2. These two places are talking about the same behavior, right?
Mhm.
These priests and the people then were intermarrying with tribes that God had told them not to, which you get if you read the full context. Yes, they were also, because they hadn't been reading the law, they were breaking a lot of things, but this is the one that God was focusing on with them. Does everybody see that? If you've got Nehemiah 13 open, that's a note you could make in your observation worksheet. You could make it at verses 4 to 6, but you could also carry this passage over to verses 13 to 16 and even 10 to 12, right? And kind of know that, hey, I have another passage that talks to me about this behavior. Any questions or anything additional on that one?
I thought it was good to see, like, these people weren't familiar. They had not been reading
Yeah,
the word of God.
Yeah.
And so they, just started slacking off, in different areas. And basically that's the same thing that happens to us if we don't stay in the word of God.
yeah. Love the Nehemiah book. I love the study. I'm so glad we did it, but we did it a long time ago. So it was good to see that as well. Their response there is so heartfelt. Yeah, good carryover. Okay. The Numbers 25 passage would be the rest of you. You had verses 7, 8, 12, and 13, but again, there's verses in between there. So if somebody wants to help us understand why it sent us to this passage, what did we learn?
So it was basically the same thing. They were playing the harlot with the daughters of Moab. And the Lord told Moses to take leaders and execute all the people. And then one man came with a Midianite woman. And so Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, saw it, and he arose and he went and killed them both. And then God said, because he had the jealousy that God has for Israel, he gave him the covenant of peace, which is what we were cross-referencing, was the covenant of peace.
Okay, exactly. So we see that here in these verses. Guys want to hang on just a second? I'm gonna have to pop off here for 1 second. I'm gonna lose my battery. Okay, so now I get to be probably in darkness to trade off, but I needed to plug in my computer, so it's not too bad. Okay, good. Thoughts or questions or more about that? What does he say? He says it's a covenant of peace, and then what does verse 13 add to that?
And it's a perpetual covenant to all of his descendants after him as well.
Okay, so this is one of the places, you'll see it in other places as well, where God says this covenant for the priesthood will be with these descendants. How do I know that Phinehas and Eleazar and Aaron are in the Levite tribe. Does it tell me that here? Do I know that? How do I know that? Are they Levites?
They are, but it doesn't tell us here.
Do you know where it tells us, Tracy, or how you know?
I'm thinking it's going to be in Exodus.
Yes. Yes. So
Aaron is the
sometimes
brother
we
of
do-
Moses, and it goes. yeah.
Yes, sometimes we do just know things, and that's fine. But if you aren't sure, sometimes you know you want to go looking. I thought, you know what, I need to go find this. It's there's a couple, but Exodus 4:14 tells me that Aaron was a Levite. There's verses that talk about Moses and Aaron's parents being from the tribe of Levi. So we can see that line continuing. Because it can be confusing if you think you're looking up Levi and then all of a sudden you're looking at verses on Aaron, and you might need a moment of, oh, wait a minute, is that the same line? And it is, it's the same line. Okay, did anybody have different passages about why God had called the Levites in particular for these when you went looking here? I did have another one. I didn't put it up here because I know this covers it, but there are other examples of why God, their behavior shows a reason sometimes why he chose them. Yeah, Dee Dee's nodding. Do you have that?
Yeah, back in Exodus, after they worshiped the golden calf, Moses asked who would stand with him.
Yep.
Who stood for the Lord, and the Levites came and stood for the Lord, and they killed the people that were worshiping the golden calf.
Yep, it was the Levites who came over. I don't know if I've got that one in front of me anymore since I was trying not to overwhelm you guys. Do you have it,
Yeah.
Dee Dee?
Exodus 32:26-29 is what I have in my notes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so Dee Dee's exactly right. They were the people that stood when Moses called for that famous scene, if you're picturing
Mhm.
10 Commandments, when the earth opens up and
Yeah.
swallows the rest of them.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
I think that was the first reference to them like setting themselves apart, other than Aaron and Moses being Levites.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think there might even be another story as well about at times when the somebody from the Levite tribe did what God was looking for someone to do, even when it's a hard thing. Like if you go back to that Numbers story, it's not really a pretty picture, but they had to do the hard things. Okay, any other references that you guys have on this, or questions or thoughts on this, now understanding what this covenant with Levi meant and what it has to do with what Malachi is talking about? Does it lend importance? Even we could tell from Malachi that Levi obviously was a respected example, but now we can see the calling on the Levites. Questions, thoughts?
My husband and I were having a discussion about whether that was a fun job to have, be a Levite.
Yeah,
Would it be like an honor, or would it be like so difficult? I mean, you're just, okay, it's like, even though kings live in
honor.
castles and have wonderful, you think, lives, you find out that that's terrible life, that they have no privacy, So I'm sure
Yeah.
there's two sides of the coin of being a Levite, I'm sure.
Well,
But-
yeah, because the priests were the ones taking in those sacrifices and killing them and all that blood. And then, but of course, then one of them would be the high priest and get to go in to the Holy of Holies. So that would be a pretty good payoff. But obviously they did have more rules they had to follow. God held them to a higher standard than everyone else as well. And you can go in Exodus and probably in Deuteronomy, and you can fully read all of the duties of the Levites. There's headings and passages that will give you all of that to go.
Isn't all of Leviticus about their duties?
Yes, and why would it be called Leviticus, by the way?
Levites.
It comes from Levi, which I think hit me for the first time today as well. I was like, oh, wait a minute. It's called Leviticus because it's about the Levites.
Yeah.
So the thing is, the moments where you go, why didn't I know that before? Did I and I forgot? Who knows anymore? Um, okay, other thoughts or insights or questions? Oh, man. Okay. So we aren't going to get all the way through 7 to 9. So since we're not going to finish, I'm going to do something that I've been wanting to do a quick, hopefully quick review on. I will give you verses to look at in case you want the help for 7 to 9, because there's a lot of them and I did winnow them down a bit. So before we end, I will put this slide up that will show you where you can start if you want to do all that on your own. And then we'll just continue. Again, we're just going to keep going until we walk through these in a way that we feel like we can. And when I say, oh, start looking at the cross references, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I think I probably forgot to say that last week and probably said, oh, you can go ahead and look up all the cross references you want to now. But just know what I would do is I would start with the ones that meant something in particular to me, right? You don't have to go in order. Do it the way you would do it if you were doing this study on your own, right? Which topic did you really want to look up? So start with those. If you didn't have any of those, then, you know, pick a place to start, maybe back at the beginning, but don't feel overwhelmed. Just know we're probably not going to get them all discussed anyway. We're all just going to keep working through them together. So I just want to give you that reminder if it felt overwhelming to look at the cross references. But what I want to do to get you started thinking about verses 6 to 9 with this focus on the priests, before we talk about the cross references, because we don't have time tonight to get through even a couple of them. Instead, let's talk about the word that we said was repeated through there. What was that word that we talked about?
Instruction.
Instruction. I'm going to walk through, I think, hopefully live online here with us, if I remember how to do it, and show you how I would do this on Bible Hub. Sometime I'll get out the big concordance maybe and show you that if you've got the big Strong's book, that's probably a good resource to hang on to these days. But let's see what we would find if we went and found these on our own. Okay, so let me know if when I get to these places, this does not work. That's not the verse I wanted open anymore, but okay, we'll switch it. Can you guys see the screen in front of me?
No.
Not yet.
You see the Bible Hub page?
No,
Okay. Hopefully in a minute we'll have it. Oh, I know what I'll have to do. All right, this might not work. I'm not techie enough. Okay, for those of you, now I have to figure out how to share it. Okay, I just have to be back in here, I think. Okay, there it is. Okay, now do you see it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so this is that page that is a huge time saver on Bible Hub. Once you're here and you can see I'm in Malachi 2:6, because this is where I would start to look for this word. Where's my scroll button? Also, one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about, if you're working on computer right now, instead of handwriting everything, this page will be a huge time saver because it shows you all the parallel translations. And then over here on the right, you can see a list of cross references. And these are usually different to some degree than what I have in my Bible. But what we want to talk about tonight is, where do I find that information on concordance? If I want to know more about the word instruction, how do I look at it? So down here, you can see cross references, commentary in Hebrew, but that just gives you a small list. If you go up here, you can go to lexicon, but if you just go straight to the Hebrew, and if you're in the New Testament, it would be Greek, you just click on that. And now I can actually see a quick version of every single word in that verse. But this one, they translated instruction, the law. And so I'm going to click over here on the Strong's number. And somebody tell me what that word is.
Torah.
Torah, what is that? Do we know that word?
Mhm.
What do the Hebrews people, still the Jews, call the Torah?
The first 5 books of the
Yep.
Bible.
The first 5 books of the Bible is the law. It's their instruction. It's the Torah. So here in Malachi, when we see the word instruction, we know God is calling it that word. That's why they use it, because that's what the Hebrew word for instruction is. Now, the other thing, so there's your Strong's number and the word. Here's a really just straightforward, simple definition: direction, instruction, or law. But what I want to do, especially if I'm looking at a word because I want to know how it relates to the passage I'm in, I have to go down to all of this gobbledygook, looks like Greek and not Hebrew. I'm only going to pay attention to this first part if I see my verse here in blue, but I don't. So I'm going to look through these definitions to see if I can find, and most of the time I can, every now and then I can't. I'm going to try to find Malachi 2. And there it is. It's under letter E, under definition 1. Can somebody read me what that says?
A body of priestly direction or instruction relating to sacred things.
Okay, so now we know that that is what God is talking about when he talks about the kind of instruction that priests should have, right? Because now we're not just talking about what the Levites were supposed to do, but we're in the verses talking about what the priests in general now in the line of Levites, they're still Levites, should do. I'm going to let that go so that we can look at the verses we have in the next couple minutes in Malachi 2. If you look at the places in verse 6, 7, 8, and 9, we can see what God says about this instruction. And now we know he means his law in full, right? His direction, his guidance. In verse 6, this was about Levi. True instruction was in his mouth, right? This was the example. In verse 7, what does it say?
Seek instruction from his mouth. Men should seek instruction from his mouth.
So if men should seek it there, what does that mean about it? If you're going to seek instruction from the lips of a priest, what has to have happened? What did the beginning of verse 7 say?
They
Should
should
be
be
True
knowledgeable.
instruction.
So
No,
if I'm
not
going there to
knowledgeable.
seek it, they have to have it, right?
Yes. Mhm.
So what it means is I should be able to go to them for knowledge and instruction of God's word. Now, we already asked ourselves last week, when we talk about instruction, what kind of instruction do we mean? Just any kind? And no, we said God's things. And now we know the Hebrew word would verify what we thought about that. How about verse 8? What does it say in regard to instruction? And the priests.
They've caused many to stumble because they've corrupted the covenant.
Okay, they're causing many to stumble by the instruction. So can they possibly have the correct instruction then?
No.
No, scripture would not hold that if you are literally giving people God's law and commands, then it can't be causing people to stumble. And then verse 9, what does it say that they're doing in regard to the instruction?
They're showing partiality in the instruction. I mean,
Okay.
I think that means that they're misinterpreting or they're leading you astray by false instruction.
Yeah, so that's a place that we're going to start next week, right? So finish anything. I'll bring up the cross references here in a second. Do whatever you would want to look through. Take this as far as you go. I'm going to give you probably, I think it's about a dozen, but I'm telling you, you could go way beyond what I'm going to put on the screen in terms of what you want to look at. So This is one, oops, I need to switch slides first. That it might take you a minute to write these down, or if you have the capability to do a screenshot, you might want to do it that way, because yeah, there's 11 of them. And I took out a few that I didn't think were quite as helpful. Also, if you've got, I got these from my Bible for verses 7, 8, and 9, because I wanted to look at all of them, because they're all about this instruction that the priest should have. So that's where I got them. And you could look at your own if you'd rather do that, or some of you probably have already done it, but you can do this as comparison if you want to. Did the chart with the verses come up?
Yes.
Okay, make sure I didn't click on the wrong screen. Okay, so I'll read them as you guys are talking about them. So verse 7, it's Leviticus, no surprise. 10, 11, then you've got a verse in Nehemiah 8, 7. Deuteronomy 17, 8 to 11, and Ezekiel 7:26. For verse 8, I have Jeremiah 18:15, Nehemiah 13:29. Now you might notice we've already had that one. So if you had already looked it up and we got the full context earlier, you'll have all the information that you need for that one. And then Ezekiel 44:10, which is an interesting one. And for verse 9, Nahum 3:6, Ezekiel 7:26, Deuteronomy 1:17, and Micah 3:11. So for example, there's not one verse there from Hosea, and a good chunk of the chapter of Hosea is about the priests. So I have one that I added that I'll have next week. But if you really want a full picture of priestly behavior, both good and bad from the Old Testament, there are a lot more verses than this. There's nothing here from the New Testament either. Does Jesus ever have any words to the priests of his day about their behavior? Yeah, we could do a whole New Testament study on priestly behavior as well. And this particular list didn't go to any of those. So this could be a 2-week study all on its own, probably, which back in the day, sometimes we would have had a whole, this is what we call a topical study, right? So you're going to jump into a chapter and then find that you have a whole topic that you can study within that chapter. This would be an example of one of those where you really could dig in deep. And those would be choices you'd make on your own when you're studying something at home. Okay, is everybody good with those passages? Again, if you've got the New Inductive Study Bible, you've got the exact same list I do. And they probably will be somewhat similar in most other Bibles. Okay. If you're watching at home and you need to know what homework is, this is it. This would be a good start. If you've already done these cross-references, just go ahead and do the rest of your cross-reference work for the rest of the chapter then at home. I would just do as much of that as you can, and we'll see how far we get with it next week. But definitely take a good amount of time to focus in on verses 7 to 9. There's 2 segments of this chapter that are sort of the keys. And I think this with the priest is one, and then that information from the second part of the chapter and how they tie together is really what we're going to want to focus on. All right, we'll see you all next week. Anybody who gets questions by just watching the video, just make sure you let me know. All righty, bye-bye.